Challenger, Miller-Heiman, Sandler. If you're in sales, you'll want to tune in and learn all about the different sales methodologies that are out there. Let's dig in this episode of Closing Time. Thanks for tuning into Closing Time, the show for go-to-market leaders. I'm Val Riley, VP of Marketing for Unbounce and Insightly. Today, I'm joined by Sales Coach Jeff Bajorek. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Hi, Val. Thanks for having me.
Jeff, there are a number of sales methodologies on the market today, and most companies choose one and adopt it across their team. I'd like to use our time today to talk through a few of the bigger names and get your take on them. Does that sound good?
Sure. There are a bunch of them out there. It seems like there's a new one popping up every day, even though these older, more established brands, if you will, seem to have a foothold of the market. I really think that's because there's a lot of validity to them in each of their different approaches. But let's dig in.
All right. We're going to start with one that I am personally trained in, and that's Miller-Heiman. I used this methodology when I was at a company that was firmly mid-market, but I would say enterprise aspirational.
I think when I think Miller-Heiman, I think enterprise. And when you go back in time and you read the books, the strategic selling or conceptual selling, I mean, these are Miller-Heiman constructs that I think illustrate how big and profound the sales process has to be in some of these enterprise accounts. And, whenever I think of the word enterprise, I think big. And that's, to me, what comes to mind when I think about Miller-Heiman. It's very thorough in terms of mapping out all of the stakeholders, mapping out all of their desires, the blue sheets that they put together and created so that people could keep track of all these things. It was really, I think, the first of its kind to do that intense of an investigation into all of the ins and outs of the sales process. And, one of the ways that, and I don't know what Miller and Heiman were doing, I should ask, actually, Alice and Liz are actually both legacy Heiman. their dad was Heiman in the Miller-Heiman pair there. I should ask them what he was thinking with this and if he really was the first person to put all this together. But I think about reducing risk. I think about, we've all been involved in deals where something out of nowhere, out of left field comes and wrecks it, or there was a decision maker we weren't aware of that comes and spoils the whole thing, even though you've done so much hard work. And I think for them to lay out that process and be so thorough with it, it can be a little bit labor intensive. It can be a little much if it's a simpler sale that you're pursuing. But the process of mapping out those stakeholders, identifying each of the individual smaller sales you need to make along the way, I love it for how thorough it is.
I think I see those blue sheets in my nightmares sometimes because they were like very tiny print and you had to do everything right. I think Miller-Heiman was interesting because they had the concept of a coach, which is somebody who's on the inside of the organization who was actually helping the salesperson kind of make headway within the org to move the sale along.
Well, everybody needs a little bit of help from their friends. And that is a concept that you either learn early or you learn in a very hard way, as far as identifying the people who can help you move a deal forward, coaches, champions, economic buyers, understanding all of the little cogs in the gear system that make the sale happen. And it's just, as someone who, thinks about rethinking the way they sell, this was the first system, if you will, that taught you to think through the aspects of the sales process versus here are my features, here are the benefits, here are the outcomes. And that's why I love it.
Yeah. Here's my logo slide. Do you want to buy? Right.
Yeah, exactly. What's taking you so long? Why don't I already have a PO?
Exactly. Okay. Well, let's jump to another methodology. And this one's a really popular one called Challenger. It's familiar to me because I'm a SaaS marketer. And I feel like Challenger speaks to doing everything faster, better, cheaper. So it just kind of fits well in the SaaS marketplace.
Challenger is one of these methodologies that, as far as the handful that I know we want to go through today, this one speaks closest to me. It's nearest and dearest. And I think it's no coincidence that this is the most modern or the most recently developed that we've seen in the marketplace today, if you will. And the idea that you have to build relationships in sales is not a new one. My question has always been, okay, based on what? Right? It used to be that it was a boys club, and it was, all about who you knew, and it was who had the corporate expense account or the corporate credit card that they were going to use this time. And you could buy somebody's time, and through that time, you could hopefully exchange a little influence. I grew up in my sales career at a time in medical devices when you weren't allowed to do that. Not only did I not have a corporate expense account, I wasn't allowed to pay for meals. I wasn't allowed to take people to concerts. I wasn't allowed to take people golfing and doing those things. And so I really had to understand what value I brought to the relationship instead of a piece of plastic with 16 digits on it that someone else would pay the bill for. And it made me think differently about how I could earn that access instead of just paying for it. And so I actually took a couple years longer than anybody else did to read Challenger, because what I heard about it was really familiar to me. And I joke, tongue in cheek, that they wrote that book about me because that was very much the way that I sold. They didn't know it. I didn't know it at the time, but gave me language to use for how I think modern enterprise selling needs to be done. You need to provide insights. You need to earn the role of the trusted advisor. You don't do that by trying to be nice and trying to make friends with someone first. You do that by challenging some of their long-held beliefs, challenging some of those sacred cows, providing them with insights that will help them. I call it, giving them the feeling that you as the seller know something they don't know, and they'd be a lot better off for it if they did know. So a conversation with you is worth having. I refer to, just in broad terms, as being someone worth talking to and having something worth talking about. That's Challenger, and putting those insights in front of people in a way that necessarily doesn't offend anybody. You're not trying to be adversarial. You're just trying to be a resource and prove that a meeting with you is going to be worthwhile.
I do feel like a Challenger rep has to have a lot of confidence. I think that's kind of what you're describing.
I will go further than confidence and call it belief. You need to believe that a meeting with you is going to be worthwhile. You need to believe that a call from you out of the blue is going to be worth the interruption. It takes a lot of that feeling to get out there every day and put a hypothesis in front of someone that you don't know. I mean, selling at its essence, and marketing helps with this, but selling at its essence is putting yourself in front of strangers. What's going to make it worth that call? And if you don't believe you're worth that call, you're going to have a hard time calling. You're going to have a hard time delivering that insight or those insights when your turn comes up. And it doesn't tend to go well. Right. And so as somebody who talks a lot about this, I've written a lot about this, the belief and swagger and your willingness to sell like only you can sell. It all has to start in the mirror every day, more so than just mapping out an account strategy or understanding what the steps in the process are. Do you believe that you can pull this off? Do you believe that you can make the first sale? And do you believe that you can make it again? That's where it all has to start.
That makes a ton of sense. Let's move on to Sandler. And I actually admitted in our pre-call that this one is new to me, but from the way you described it, it made sense because I'm more of a B2B mid-market enterprise marketer, and feels like this one might be on the starter end of the market or may have just been around a lot longer.
It's been around since the 70s or 80s. I don't remember exactly when David Sandler wrote, the name of the book was You Can't Teach a Kid How to Ride a Bike at a Seminar. And I'm not quite, as a clever name for a book, I'm not quite sure how it relates to the methodology itself, but as I have worked with a lot of small businesses, many of them are very well familiar or even indoctrinated into Sandler. And as I've spoken with people, I've spoken with trainers, I've spoken with solopreneurs and freelancers who, once they're exposed to these concepts, it's like their mind is blown. Like, oh my gosh. I got a call from a friend one time. He said, Jeff, have you ever heard of the upfront contract? I said, Well, yeah, I mean, just agreeing on the next meeting before the current meeting is over. I mean, setting an agenda for a call. He's like, Jeff, I couldn't believe this is where all of my meetings were going to die. I never had next steps. And, I have a bias as someone who's been selling for 20 years. You just know what you need to do going into the call. I didn't take Sandler training to learn that, but most people don't get formal sales education. So to be able to put into simple principles the steps of a sales process, what needs to happen, what will help you earn that next step, and to put it into parlance that just about everybody can understand. It's a very difficult thing to do. This is a valuable framework for helping those solopreneurs or individual contributors to just understand what their next steps need to be. And it's been around, I mean, going on 50 years now, and it's very popular, very profound, and there are a lot of reasons for that.
Yeah, totally makes sense. So I brought up on our pre-call MEDDICC as a sales methodology, but you have a slightly different take on MEDDICC, that it doesn't fit the classic mold of a methodology.
Yeah, I think we can argue semantics about what's a methodology, what's a framework, what's a process, what's a checklist. I think of MEDDICC or MEDDICC. I've got a friend who refers to it as MEDDICC because the paper process, that P in there, is really important. I think this is more of, and I think it ties very closely actually with Miller-Heiman, because it's most useful with a profound, I keep saying the word profound. I don't think I've said the word profound this often in a conversation in a long time, if ever. But in these big enterprise deals, because there are so many things to keep track of, you need all of the devices you can to keep track of them. And so when you look at, and we don't need to go through them here, but each letter in the MEDDICC or MEDDICC acronym rather, stands for something you need to take a look at. It's helping us to keep track of all the things that need to happen in order for a sale to be made. And I go back to the idea of reducing risk. We can take some things for granted and we can still win sales. But every time we ignore or neglect one of those letters in the acronym, we introduce risk to our sales. So the bigger the sale, the more important the revenue, the more important the commission check is, the more you're going to want to make sure that all those I's are dotted, all those T's are crossed, and you're not overlooking something in plain sight just because you assumed it was going to happen. So one of the things I think is really helpful, and a friend of mine really promotes this MEDDICC system. His name is David Weiss. You can look him up. But he actually creates a scorecard for himself and scores himself. Is this red, yellow, or green, like a stoplight? And so that the color coding of this scorecard also helps give you an idea of how well you're performing in each one of these domains. And there's nothing quite like a device like that to show you where you stand in a deal.
Yeah, it seems like a really good organizational tool, checklist, like you mentioned, with just color coding it. Like at a glance, it would be really easy for you to see, let's say you've got 5 or 6 deals working. If you had a MEDDICC list for each one, you could just quickly get up to speed with where you are in that particular deal if you have to switch gears during the day.
And I think about, regardless of what you sell, you need to think about the complexity of your work week. Is your work week complex because you have a lot of simple deals going on at the same time? If you have a lot of simple deals going on at the same time, you may just need a spreadsheet. Your CRM, like Insightly, might be exactly the tool that you need. If you are managing a smaller amount of really complex deals, it's heresy to say this, but you may not need a CRM as much as you need multiple MEDDICC scorecards, to keep track of, do you need a tool that help you keep track of 4 deals? No, you need a tool to help you keep track of the 45 individual influencers of each one of those deals, right? And so really think about, as you go to evaluate a tool like Insightly, think about the things that it will help you keep track of. Think about how much easier it will make your sales process from an organizational standpoint, regardless of which methodology you choose. I think when you dig into either of them, you find that, or any of the 4 that we've talked about today, you'll find that they're variations on a theme of fundamentals that you just need to get right. And if you subscribe to one or the other, there's a lot of overlap, but pick the one that makes the most sense to you. But understand the complexity that you've chosen in your sales career has a tool that will help you keep track of the minutia, keep track of the details, keep track of the things that are going to make you successful that are often overlooked. And that's where your results will really grow.
Jeff, thanks so much for your insight on those methodologies. Actually, what you just said is super interesting to me. I'd like to go further on our talk and learn how you kind of sift through the options and pick the best one. But we're short on time right now. Can I convince you to come back soon and we can continue that conversation?
If I had a nickel for every time I was on a podcast and near the end, they said, you know what, Jeff, you've been talking a while. We should probably do this again. I'd have a few nickels. But yeah, I'm happy to come back. Anytime I get asked back, I know it's a good place to be.
Awesome. Okay, we will get that booked. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today on Closing Time.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to all of you for tuning in. If you'd like to stay up to date on new Closing Time episodes, subscribe to the Closing Time newsletter and using the link in the description below. We will see you next week.